I declare the meeting of the Port Phillip City Council open, and I welcome the members of the public that are here tonight. The City of Port Phillip respectfully acknowledges the Yalukit Willem clan of the Boonwurrung. We pay our respects to their elders, both past and present. We acknowledge and uphold their traditional relationship to this land. Council has a local law that determines how this meeting will be conducted. There's a time allotted in tonight's agenda for public question time. And during public question time, members of the public can ask specific questions on general matters other than those relating to a topic that's on the agenda for tonight. Members of the public are only to ask a specific question and shall not provide any statements or contextual comments relating to that question. Consequently, the official minutes of the meeting will only record the question asked and any response given. The number of questions that a member of the public may ask shall be at the discretion of the chairperson. There is also an opportunity for members of the public to ask a question or make a comment on a specific item on tonight's agenda. This will be done prior to Council considering the item. We encourage questions or comments from the public that are directed through the Mayor, are not defamatory, abusive or objectionable in language or substance, but rather are presented in a spirit of mutual respect of the Council and the community. And we ask all speakers to abide by the direction of the Mayor. If you wish to ask a question or speak to a report, please complete the blue form that's available at the table just outside the chamber and hand it to a staff member. And I encourage you to limit your questions and comments to around 3 minutes and to avoid repeating any points that have already been made by other speakers. And please note that all council meetings now are being live streamed. Live streaming and recording allows the community to watch and listen to meetings in real time, providing greater access to council decision making and debate and improving openness and transparency. The live stream of this meeting is available on Council's website, and the recording of this meeting will also be available to view a few days after the meeting on Council's website and YouTube channel. The cameras will film and record councillors at this meeting. However, care is taken not to film or record images of the members of the public. If a member of the public asks a question or makes a comment about an agenda item, they will not be filmed, but their voice will be heard in the live stream and recorded. So please also note, in accordance with Council's local law, that this meeting cannot be filmed or audio taped unless permission is granted by the Mayor. In the unlikely event of an emergency evacuation, please follow the instructions of the Chief Warden. Okay, councillors, we'll go to the agenda now, and first up is apologies. We don't have any apologies, just the councillors just ducked out for a second. Okay. So item 2, minutes of the previous meeting. Councillors, the minutes of the ordinary meeting held on the 5th of September 2018 have been circulated. Are there any questions relating to these minutes? If not, can I have a motion to confirm these minutes? Councillor Baxter to move and Councillor Simic to second. I'll now put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Item 3, which is declarations of conflicts of interest. Does any councillor have a conflict of interest in a matter being discussed at tonight's meeting? I note there are none. Item 4, petitions and joint letters. And councillors, we don't have any petitions or joint letters tonight. Sealing schedule, and councillors, we don't have any documents requiring sealing either. So we'll go to number 6, which is public question time. And we have 3 people that have requested to speak, and it looks like 2 are going to speak together. Well, it's going to be interesting. So I'd like to call Jeffrey Conahan and Kate Richards, please, to come up. You could just pull up one of those chairs next to that microphone there, please. And if you could state your names again, and your suburb for the record. Thank you. I'm not sure that that's on. Can you have another go?
Good evening. I'm Kate Richards and I'm here tonight on behalf of the Group Resident Action St Kilda. As we're now approaching another summer season of outdoor events around the St Kilda foreshore, I'd actually like to quote the City of Port Phillip Outdoor Events Strategy 2018 to 2022 under the heading Why Events, and then ask some pertinent questions. It reads that the City of Port Phillip aims to plan, attract and direct events to ensure our city is welcoming, healthy, safe and vibrant for all. It says it's commonly recognised and accepted that events bring a wealth of benefits to a community, from health and well-being of its residents through to economic development for local businesses. From discussions with locals in the immediate noise catchment zone, and that's the term I've coined to cover the several thousand who are in the direct firing line of noise from the many loud music events that we have, I actually can't seem to locate people experiencing any benefits at all to health or well-being or economic development, especially considering the many businesses that have died in Fitzroy Street in recent years. So one question I have is, for Council, is on what basis are you actually making that claim in that statement? Further down the same strategy document, the survey from How Can We Tell only shows if those surveyed found one positive benefit of any outdoor event, which could be something as innocuous as a farmer's market, not necessarily a large and loud music event. So quite different things, I'm sure you'll agree. Interestingly, though, there is no equivalent measure of those surveyed who might find at least one negative impact of outdoor events, which would seem to be a startling omission for a survey. And the survey doesn't appear to directly address issues of health and well-being either, yet Council appears to be using this as justification for its continuing outdoor events program through until 2022 at the moment. And according to other information provided by Council, only a small proportion of those surveyed were from the immediate noise catchment zone. So it's very easy to find a benefit of anything when you're not directly or adversely affected by it. So a couple of questions for Council. Thank you for bearing with me. I'd like to ask, what actual figures or studies can Council provide to substantiate that claim on that document, when so many of our local residents have found it necessary to form our current resident association, and when so many businesses in the area, especially at the beach end of Fitzroy Street, have simply died a very tragic death? If Council can indeed provide any such studies, are any of them based on continual and regular events, so almost every fortnight over summer, being conducted in highly populated areas that we're subjected to each summer? We're also asking, will Council commit to surveying the residents within this immediate noise catchment zone? So that's the people who live in the immediate area, and there are thousands of us, to better determine whether these types of disruptive events are even warranted according to the above City of Port Phillip statement, let alone wanted by residents? And will City of Port Phillip commit to preparing a detailed questionnaire in conjunction with members of various local residents groups such as our own and Whiskera, to measure the true impact of events in this area and to implement a plan that takes in the real wants and needs of residents, not simply those of external commercial organisations that give nothing back to St Kilda? Thank you.
Thank you. Did you want to speak, Mr Conahan? Yes.
Yes,
just on those other the questions that you ask, Ms Richards, we may take most of them on notice, given that we haven't had any heads up, but Mr Benazik might have an answer for a couple of them, maybe, I'm not sure. But please go ahead.
Shall I proceed? Thank you, Councillor Voss. My question is on the back of Kate's. We're both involved in the same residents association. I've got two specific areas on the conduct of events to ask questions about. The first is in correspondence with officers of the City of Port Phillip. I've been told that there are constant improvements have been undertaken with the review of the conduct of events, and in hearing that, we can only assume that a lot more work is to be done if last year's noise levels were the result of considerable improvements. The concerts that are held on Catani Gardens and the St Kilda Beach foreshore can be heard on Grey Street, at St Kilda Junction, and for the Fatboy Slim concert last summer in Yarraville. Now, this is when I've been told that one of the improvements made has been the reversal of the speakers into the sea. That's nothing new. That was done in 2008. So to be told that that's part of the recent continuous improvement is a little galling. My own home is 500 metres from the beach, and 3 times last summer we packed up, went into the NGV and stayed in the city for dinner, because I don't think it's unreasonable to sit in your own living room with the windows open, and we were unable to do that comfortably. I could hear the lyrics to Fatboy Slim in the living room. So my question is about continuous improvement initiatives with resident amenity in mind, not on the successful delivery of a particular event. The next question relates to the way complaints are monitored and measured. And I have, again, another example to give you, and it's the last of the sports events, the Sanitarium Fun Run on Sunday, March the 11th. I was told that I was the only person to have complained, but it took me 4 phone calls on the morning, and I still ended up hitting a brick wall. I phoned Assist, the out-of-hours number, transferred to the weekend operator, who didn't know that there was an event on, which I found quite strange, given that it was the biggest thing on in the city of Port Phillip. I eventually got a phone number to phone the organiser. The phone number that was supplied was to the Sanitarium Sydney office, open Monday to Friday. I got an answering machine, and I eventually had a conversation with the events and marketing head on Thursday the 15th of March, who pretty well cut the conversation off by saying, "We were issued a permit, we complied with it, thank you for your phone call." The local officer on the day, this is Sunday, March the 15th, who I spoke to, that's the officer on duty who is out and about, did not have a permit for the Sanitarium event, and so was unable herself to judge if it was complying with the details of the permit. So if the assessment is that I was the only person to complain, no, I was the only person to have 4 phone calls. And so it's, you know, if we want to make sure that nobody's going to follow it through, a very complicated measure should be put up. With that, a review. You know, I'm asking: would the review include complaints mechanisms, and also our continued invitation for noise monitoring to occur in our homes? We've got a dozen people who've put their hands up. Rather than being noise measured for the comfort of the people attending the event, as yet, nobody's come forward and accepted our invitation for noise monitoring in the house. Okay. I realise these have to be taken on notice.
Thank you, Mr Conahan, and thank you for sharing your experiences again with us. I have heard this before from you, and I'm very sorry that you've had the experience that you've had. Just to start off with, I'd have to say that when our event strategy comes out each year, it is widely consulted on, and we would appreciate your feedback on those. So if you haven't done so, please make sure you do that. I note that there is the Listen Out concert on this weekend, and perhaps Mr Benazik, you might be able to give us some information about who's going to be there. No, you haven't got that? But there will be a staff member on site and will be available via phone. So if there are any issues, I'm assured that will happen this weekend. So, so no more to say. So we'll take the rest on notice. Thank you very much. Mr. Bill Phelan, please. Welcome, Mr. Phelan. Would you please turn on your microphone? I think it's been turned off.
It's the button.
There we are.
That's right. Thank you, Madam Mayor and Councillors. I'm here to ask a question about the proposed closure of the slip lane of Graham Street into Albert Street, Port Melbourne. Madam Mayor, you and Councillor Bond are obviously aware of this because this came through this council in June 2016. There obviously has been no urgency to do this, but in the meantime, an alternate proposal to the one Council have prepared has been given to Council, and although only a few of you know about this, it was prepared by Andrew O'Brien, who's the chairman of O'Brien Traffic. This is one of the leading traffic engineering firms in Melbourne, and Andrew O'Brien is probably the best qualified traffic engineer in this city. The alternate plan provides optimum pedestrian safety, and pedestrian safety is the only reason for this proposed closure. It is far superior to the council proposal. In addition to that, and one of the great concerns about the ratepayers of this municipality is the way council squanders our money. And in this situation, the O'Brien proposal would save this council, and the ratepayers of course, $70,000, $80,000 at least. There's absolutely no need for the slip lane closure. There's no need to be spending $120,000 or $130,000 on this when the pedestrian safety is the only issue. And what I want to know is why Council have not considered the O'Brien proposal. There's only the two of you that were here in 2016, and although the works are scheduled to commence on Monday, the 24th, it's not too late for a common sense decision to be made to at least delay that so the councillors can all see this alternate proposal and consider whether we ought to be wasting $70,000 or $80,000 on what will not improve anything, and it will be inconvenient to the residents of Albert Street. 58 people signed a petition that was presented to Council. Council sought to ignore that request that we not close this lane, but I believe that there's very, very sound reasons why the O'Brien proposal should be considered and looked at by the councillors who were not privy to that decision. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Phelan. I'd like to ask Ms. Rosick actually to address a couple of questions, but I'd first like to say the petition wasn't ignored. It was heard by the whole of Council and a decision was made by Council. Ms. Rosick, would you speak to that, please?
Through you, Madam Mayor, that's correct. It was considered by Council on the 14th of June, prior to Council endorsing the pedestrian safety improvement project at the corner of Albert Street and Graham Street. I have met with Mr. Phelan and with the Council traffic engineers who are delegated in this matter to look at the alternate proposal. It doesn't, according to the engineering advice that I've been provided, it doesn't add any extra protection for the pedestrians. The option endorsed by Council, it's considered, is the preferred option as it removes the pedestrians further away from Graham Street and reduces the traffic in Albert Street to which is used quite heavily by families. So I did review the proposal presented by Mr Phillip, but it has not been presented for Council for endorsement, as Council's already made the decision to endorse the original proposal. And the reason why works are delayed is because they were planned in 2017 and funded for this financial year.
Thank you, Ms Rosick. Okay, councillors, that's the end of our public question time. We will now move on to a presentation of awards. And prior to councillor question time, pursuant to Council's meeting procedure local law, the CEO has requested, and I've given consent, to the adding of an agenda item to the meeting tonight relating to presentation of an award. So I'll now call on the CEO to explain to Council the importance of celebrating this award and the process for tonight.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Mayor. The Council has received a very significant award, which is a corporate certification standard awarded by the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply. This is an award which recognises the standard of our procurement processes, and it is a very difficult standard to achieve. I understand we're the first council in Australia to receive this award, and one of very few worldwide. And I'm going to call on Mr Wayne Moore, who's our Coordinator, Contracts and Procurement, to present the award to you on behalf of Council. Madam Mayor. Time myself.
Thank you for that, Mr Moore, and it's great to hear that Council has such high standards with procurement. Councillors, we'll move to item 7, which is councillor question time. Do you have any questions? Councillor Copsey.
I wanted to raise a question with officers that was sent to me by a local student during the last couple of weeks. And this question, the student who contacted me was keen to understand what the City of Port Phillip is doing to ensure that there are affordable and sufficient supply of rental units and affordable housing in the City of Port Phillip. They were very concerned. They thought that the rent was too damn high and that it was very difficult for people to obtain affordable places to live in Port Phillip. Could the officers please give us an overview for this student's benefit?
Yes, who's going to... Miss Bennett.
Through you, Madam Mayor, the City of Port Phillip has a long history in the provision and support of affordable housing in this municipality. The City of Port Phillip has a landmark policy document called In Our Backyard, which outlines a range of different priorities and strategies to support the provision of affordable housing in the municipality. The city is currently moving forward with a project in Marlborough Street, which seeks to provide a number of affordable housing units for our community. We're also currently in the process of developing a 12 to 18 month action plan so that we can take that council priority and really accelerate its advancement.
Thank you, Ms Bennett. Any other questions, councillors? Okay, then we'll move on to presentations of reports. Councillors, we will go to item 10.1 first, which is the endorsement of Move, Connect, Live, which is our integrated transport strategy 2018 to 2028. And we don't have anyone that's requested to speak. So, councillors, do you have any questions of the officers? If not, do I have a mover for this or something different? Councillor Simic to move, Councillor Copsey to second. Councillor Simic, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and I suspect that the reason there's no questions forthcoming at this point from councillors is that we've spent a very long time working on this strategy. I think 6 months plus that we've been talking, probably, actually it's been a year actually when I count up the months, working with officers, working with our community to understand the issues that we're going to face in the coming years. If people continue to travel using the modes of transport that they're currently using, particularly one of the concerns that the City of Port Phillip has seen is the use of private vehicles, which if it continues at exactly the same rate that people are using them today, our streets are going to be at gridlock throughout our municipality. People won't be able to get around. So our policy looks at how we can work with stakeholders and other arms of government, but also what changes we can make as a municipality to make our city more walkable, easier to move around using active transport like bike riding, and what sort of public transport we need in order to get us to the 21st century. So it very much looks beyond the short-term election cycle and the local council election cycle, and really looks to the future of where we need to move in order to ensure that we have sustainable transport options available in our municipality. It's a very detailed strategy. I look forward to discussing it with councillors tonight, but I do hope that councillors adopt it as it really sets a direction which will hopefully also make it very clear to our state counterparts, and at a state level there's no integrated transport strategy, which makes it very clear that we've got a plan for the future, and that Council's taking a lead on that tonight. So, councillors, I wholly endorse this strategy to you tonight.
Thank you, Councillor Simic. Councillor Copsey.
I'm excited to see another of our major transformative strategies come to the chamber tonight. I wanted to thank the officers who've worked very hard to get the strategy to us in this form, and also all of the community members who've participated in creating this. It's a really tough nut for us to crack, because we know that our streets are already very busy and that they're going to need to service more people in the municipality. And so councillors trying to work with the community and our partners to make sure that we make that transition in a way that maximises sustainable and active transport and good quality transport choices for people in our municipality. I'm excited by the opportunities that are presented if we work together and decide to do things differently under this strategy. We want to deliver, for example, from councils and much more walkable streets so that it's easy for people to get around in your local neighbourhood catchment safely and enjoyably, and also huge improvements to our bike network, including identification of some priority bike corridors that will be safe and enjoyable places for people of all riding abilities, not just those who are really confident riders. On that note, we've got the great council initiative coming up, the Tour de Cecil, which is a celebration of everyday bike riding and a chance for people in the municipality to take part in really fun activities like bike confidence courses and a film night, pedal-powered film night. So please check that out. If you're a transport fan like I am, you'll be excited to see this coming tonight. I think one of the things I wanted to highlight about this strategy is that it very much depends on us working with community. So we appreciate all of the input that has led to the development of this strategy. It also depends very much on large level investment in big infrastructure projects, particularly public transport for our city. As a council, we've prioritised some advocacy items this year in the public transport realm especially. We've got the Melbourne Metro 2 project, which is going to be crucial for us delivering the transport outcomes that we need to Fisherman's Bend as development proceeds. So we need that delivered early. And there are a number of other really big ticket items like the tram coming to Fisherman's Bend, separated cycle routes for St Kilda Road, and also working with us to fund improvements at several black spots that we have throughout our community. So we're very cognisant that this is an area where we're going to have to do things differently, and I think that the vision that's presented here in this transport plan acknowledges the scale of that change, but also looks at where we've got opportunities to make getting around our city a more enjoyable and safer activity, which I'm really pleased to endorse tonight, and I'm looking forward to getting on with delivering it.
Thank you, Councillor Copsey. Would anyone else like to speak? Councillor Crawford.
So this was a hard strategy to formulate, but I do think it is a game-changing strategy. Will it be harder to implement? I think so, because it requires behaviour change on the part of us all. This is a strategy, in order to deliver, it will affect us all in some capacity, whether it's the car park out front, the front of your house, or having to walk sometimes when you have in the past driven. It will require us all to change, and it really will require us to embrace a new paradigm of how we move around this city. Will it be uncomfortable at times? Most likely. Will it be an opportunity to maintain the amenity and keep this area great? Definitely. So with all of those things, knowing that this is going to be probably one of the hardest and least popular strategies to implement in order to keep our city livable and wonderful and all of the things that we love about it, I know that I will stand firm behind it, because we do have to make this change. The alternative really isn't worth thinking about.
Thank you. Councillor Gross.
I thought this is such a momentous strategy that I'd just go through the 5 outcomes, talk about some of the political difficulties, and also just talk about the money, because as I added up, it's 36 million over the next 10 years. And in local government land, that's a considerable amount of money. So, the good thing about this document is that it keeps on saying, why are we doing this? And I think it plausibly explains why we do stuff. So the first outcome is that our city's transport network, streets and places cater for our growing community. Because there's going to be, in the vicinity of 100,000 extra souls who live in the city of Port Phillip, the congestion on our roads, the inability to park your car is going to only get worse, and we have to have the planning tools for this outcome, and this is about a $5 million outcome. So some of the issues that we deal with are updating our planning scheme, looking at green infrastructure, and there's 22 priority actions in these particular outcomes. So it's 4.5 million, sorry, not 5 million. The second outcome, outcome 2, is, our community has to become healthier because it's safe, connected, convenient walking and bike riding choices. This involves changes to infrastructure, and once again, it's going to cost over the next 10 years, 18.2 million, and some of the works that are alluded to in this outcome, our priority actions, including completing the intersection upgrade of Wellington Street, trial initiatives to increase priority and space for walking, wider footpaths, safer bike riding facilities, and encouraging and supporting the community to ride bikes. So this is largely about infrastructure, but it's also about conversations with the community. And, it's a considerable commitment of money, and the bicycle corridors will be extensively improved. And for all of these outcomes, there's going to be tangible measurements of progress. So, we want our walking trips to increase, and this is all going to be measured. Outcome 3, our community has convenient public transport choices that make it easier to move and connect. Now, this is where we begin to work with our partners in the state. So there's less money to be spent here, but, you know, it's really about working with our partners, and we hope that works. And as an outcome, we're going to be spending $8 million over the next decade. So a considerable amount of money, and that includes partner with the Victorian Government and public transport providers to increase reliability and frequency of both tram, and I'm particularly interested in bus services. So there's all sorts of actions in that outcome. The fourth outcome is our community understands that parking is limited and a shared resource, and works with council to ensure the fairest access. So this is clearly going to be a difficult conversation with our community. We had this conversation about 15 years ago in the pretentiously entitled Parking Charrette. It's, you know, there was a lot of outrage about some of the ideas and notions, and I'm hoping, and I'm actually confident, that that won't happen this time around, because time's moved on, the community's understanding has moved on, and I think this conversation's structured less offensively and more constructively. So I'd like to congratulate the officers on outcome 4. Once again, many millions of dollars are going to be devoted to new technologies and new ways of dealing with cars. Outcome 5, the lucky last, our community benefits from new transport options and technology to move around. This world is changing, and, you know, some of the things we've talked about, actually the parking pressure might go away if we adopt this strategy, and we're going to introduce new technology to make it easy to find and pay for parking. Already our neighbour, Stonington, with its new development in Cato Square, has built 2 levels of parking. The first level of parking can be adapted to a non-parking use. Of course, it is foreseeable that with the growth of driverless cars and Uber, that parking might still be a problem. Parking might diminish as a problem. So we're not the only ones who are looking at the new technologies available. And for this particular outcome, it's $5 million. So it's a big commitment. It's taking on really challenging issues. It used to be said of the City of Port Phillip that there were 3 issues that really mattered here. Parking, parking and parking. You can hear.
Still are.
Still are. So, you know, business as usual is not acceptable. And the environmental outcomes that I hope we reap are going to be exciting and necessary. So sorry to go through all of that rigmarole, but I just thought that given the amount of money, given the commitment of this council in terms of the officers and the councillors, and how important it is to many of us here, that I just had to go through it and emphasise the gravity of the ideas and the substance of the budgetary proposals. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Gross. Would anyone else like to speak? Councillor Baxter.
Don't worry, I'll be brief. Look, I did just want to talk about this. I think is a really good strategy, and it's a really good way of setting out how we're going to go forward on this really big challenge. The fact of the matter is that people have to get out of cars and get around in other ways. Otherwise, the growth in car use is going to choke the entire city. So there are 2 main ways of getting people out of cars, and there's essentially carrots and sticks. The sticks are congestion, difficulty finding parks, all that sort of stuff, and a lot of that's going to happen naturally. It's just going to become pretty unpleasant to drive a car naturally as we densify, and that becomes an issue. this has a lot of carrots in it. This is about how do we entice people out of their cars? How do we get them onto a bike? How do we make it safer? How do we ensure that people feel comfortable doing those sorts of things? So I'm very, very pleased to see that that it has those in there and that we're spending real money on doing that. The other really important thing is that this is integrated. It takes into account parking, cars, bikes, pedestrian areas and public transport. It's also integrated with what we see other partners doing, because as we know, bike riders or all sorts of other people who take transport routes, these don't respect governmental boundaries or local government boundaries or anything like that. So we need to make sure that what we're doing lines up really well with the City of Glen Ira's transport strategy and the City of Stonington's, and what the state government is going to do on their roads and how we can link all that in. And I think that's been done really well. I'm particularly pleased to see that Canal Ward has a large amount of projects over the next 10 years in there about getting people around on bikes, which I think is going to be fantastic. And it's about using our local roads to funnel people into public transport corridors and into other active transport corridors that we're hoping the state government will step up to. So it's all pretty exciting. I'm
Anybody else? Councillor Brand?
Yes, I'm excited about it. There's been a lot of talk. There's been a lot of talk about getting people out of cars, and I think maybe it's overemphasising. I personally don't think this policy is especially punitive on car use. I think it focuses mainly on offering better alternatives, which I think is the way to go. I don't think it's I don't think it's particularly carrying a big stick on that, and I don't think it was ever intended to be. So I just wanted to make that note. I think it is really very, very much about providing better alternatives that will become more and more used because they are actually better alternatives when we get around to organising them and balancing out and making choices about our activities and how we do them.
Councillor Bond.
I won't be supporting this, but first a little bit of a history lesson on how we got to where we are. Back in about 2015, I moved a motion in a council meeting to, I can't remember if it was to halve the cost or make free the parking on Fitzroy Street, in order to give the traders there an opportunity to do a little bit of, to recover and give people, take away one of those significant barriers to parking on Fitzroy Street and in the surrounding area. That night, that proposal got knocked back by the majority of councillors. I think Councillor Voss supported it and Councillor Huxley and the rest knocked it back. But they moved an alternate motion to say we would go away and do an investigation into the cost of parking throughout the municipality, just to see if there was something we could do to make the cost of parking on Fitzroy Street more equitable with other areas of the municipality where parking was so much less than it was in a struggling area like Fitzroy Street. Out of that little piece of research became something that got titled an integrated transport strategy, and 3 and a bit years down the track and $700,000 later, we sit here tonight in council with a policy that, look, there's some good things in here for transport, but fundamentally it's an anti-car document. Some of these things, and I look forward to you councillors who are supporting this being front and centre when we start and review the maximum number of permits allowed per household for parking on the streets, and taking away parking permits from houses that have off-street parking, forcing them to park off-street. Introduction of tiered pricing structure for permits, for example, and I'm reading all this from our plan here. So whilst it's one thing to support this in the chambers, I look forward to you all being front and centre when those conversations need to be had with angry residents who are not going to be all that happy with us taking away their parking permits for their streets out the front of their houses.
Would anyone else like to speak? Councillor Pearl.
I think I've been very consistent voting against this from day one for the two core reasons that planning isn't fully considered in this document. That's the core component of population growth, which then drives the traffic flows or transport flows of population. And the second one is the open and honest conversation about what's happening with parking permits. The strategy has nice things in it, but a lot of this is out of our control. And the strategy spends a lot of time talking about those things that are out of our control. The things that are firmly in our control, we still haven't had frank and open, honest conversations about people at a street level about who is going to lose. And when you're in a population that's ageing and growing in family numbers, it's extraordinarily difficult to say to a family of 4, get on your bike and go down the street with young children, or downsizers in their 70s and 80s walk to the doctor instead of driving there. These are simple practical things, but this is how our population is forming. And this document from start to finish hasn't formed part of that. I hear a number of councillors groaning, etc. We all weren't voted here to vote the same way, and you should respect the views and opinions of other councillors and listen to them, because I think there's some wisdom in all of our thoughts and all of our motives. I don't support it, haven't supported it from day one, so it should be no surprise to those of you that are voting for this evening.
Thank you, Councillor Pearl. Before I ask Councillor Simic to close, I'll also say a few words, and that is that, first of all, we all have a collective role in improving our transport accessibility. Parking permits is something that's been brought up, and I'm really pleased that this is in the plan, because we need to have a conversation about this with our community. This is something that our community has been complaining about for a long time. It's not just, it's not right, and now we need to have that conversation with our community to make sure that, that whatever decisions come out of it are transparent. I'd like to thank the officers for coming on this incredibly long journey, because this strategy has been around about a few times and it hasn't started off the way it's ended. And I'm really happy that right now we've got a clear, readable problem, action and a focus document showing us what the way forward is. And I want to thank the officers for that, because it is a terrific blueprint for going forward. You know, this is a collective effort, as I mentioned. Some of it is about advocacy and some of it's about things that we can do here and now. And I'm really pleased to be able to have a strategy that's very clear about what we're going to go forward on. I'd also like to thank the community for the significant engagement that's been had on this strategy. And I'm sure that most people will be able to see their thoughts and comments reflected in this strategy. The directions around we are connected and it's easy to move around, and the other strategic direction around we're growing and keeping our character. There's something in the percentages that was alluded to by Councillor Copsey and Councillor Gross around the percentages of growth, but if I distill that down to the figure of there's 50 new people, or in fact 7 new people moving into our municipality every single day, and if only half of them have a car, we can't keep going the way we're going. We've only got 52,000 on-street car spots, which are already at capacity. So we need to have some interventions and we need to think smart about how we go forward. We can't just keep going the way we're going. So it makes absolute sense to have a strategy and a plan to go forward. And so I'll be supporting this strategy tonight. Thank you. Councillor Simic, would you like to close?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, councillors, for all of your statements. I do agree that it is important for us to have frank and honest conversations and discussions, and that all of our opinions are taken into consideration in decision making. It's my job to round up tonight and respond to any comments that have been made and try and convince councillors one last-ditch attempt to vote in favour of this strategy. We've had a frank and honest conversation with our community. There's been a very long consultation process, and the consultation hasn't finished on many of the outcomes, and some councillors tonight have chosen to focus only on one of the outcomes, which will require further discussion. On many of the outcomes, there's a requirement and a need for us to continue consulting with our community, and that's certainly what we take on tonight. The policy says that a business-as-usual approach is not possible. We just cannot move into the future behaving and acting the same way we have been. When, as the Mayor said, our population is set to increase at 7 new people to a municipality a day, and is going to create many challenges for us in the way we're able to move around. I've just got back a few weeks ago from a short trip to Japan, where in Japan they started planning for infrastructure, not when their population got to 127 million, but decades ago. And the infrastructure means that people are able to move around effectively from one city to another city using fast trains, reliable public transport, and are able to move around effectively. Most importantly, they have the choice as to how they move around. Driving is not banned in Japan, a huge population, but you don't see crowded streets because there's no need for people to use the streets. People who need to drive, elderly people, people with disabilities, people with children in the car, aren't stopped from driving. The point is that they have the choice as to whether they want to do that or not. And given the choice, there's so many trips that I would do, not in a car, but quite often that choice is taken away from me. Population is considered. One of the comments is made that planning and population hasn't been taken into account. Part of the basis and the call for change is that our population is increasing. Like I said, the policy doesn't stop you from driving, it creates the choice. It is disappointing that some councillors have come to us tonight, given the long process that we've had to get to the point tonight, raise concerns about a specific issue, which I'm sure any member in our community, when we say to them that there's a need for us to have a conversation around parking, around permits, that they'll agree with us. And we need to do that openly and transparently in a way where our community is involved. We need an integrated transport strategy because unless we have a plan as to how we'll move forward, we'll continue with projects here, projects there, and that will not result in the sort of infrastructure that's required for the future. We're living in the 21st century, and I invite Councillor Bond and Councillor Pearl to join us there in voting in support of this proposal tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, councillors. I'll put that motion. All those in favour? That motion is carried. All those against? That motion is carried. Councillor Bond has called for a division, so I'll ask you to vote again. All those in favour? Councillor Copsey, Councillor Brand, Councillor Simics, Councillor Voss, Councillor Gross, Councillor Crawford and Councillor Baxter. All those against? Councillor Bond and Councillor Pearl. That motion is carried. Now we'll move on to item 11.1, which is the Don't Waste It Waste Management Strategy 2018 to 2028, the consideration of the submissions and adoption of the strategy. And we have one person that's requested to speak. I'd like to ask Ms Jill Sokol, please, to come forward. Ms Sokol, if you could please have a seat. Well, you need to be on the recorded.
Recording. Thank you.
If you could just state your name again.
So my name is Gillian Sokol and I am a resident of Elwood. My question relates to the strategy. I'm very grateful for council officers in the efforts they put in preparation of this strategy, and I would endorse the general direction of the strategy. Whilst I might wish it would be more ambitious, I recognise that we have to bring the whole of community along with us in this move to reduce our waste. I particularly am interested in the attachment number 3, and I really seek some clarification and elaboration on terminology like, under actions, we've got words like we will set guidelines or we will ensure it is possible for people who live in apartments to recycle. We'll partner and explore the feasibility. We will educate and support residents. To me, those terms are quite broad and general, and I would really seek some clarity on what these are in terms of action. To me, action invites something more specific than that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms Sokol. That's the last of our community that have requested to speak to this item. Councillors, I'm just wondering, does anyone have a question for the officers? Councillor Simic, you have a... Ms Sokol.
Ms Sokol, thank you for coming tonight and speaking with us. I'd like to move an alternate recommendation which actually defers this decision for us tonight to a future council meeting.
So Councillor Simic has moved a motion to defer, and that will read that defers this item and that it be brought back to council at the earliest opportunity. Is that correct, Councillor Simic? And Councillor Gross, you'd like to second that motion?
Yeah.
Councillor Simic, would you like to speak to the motion?
Very briefly, just to explain, and like I said, thank you for coming and speaking with us tonight, and also thank you to everyone who's contributed so far to the policy. This, along with the integrated transport strategy, which we just talked about, is another big strategy which will have a significant impact on our community moving forward. We today, as councillors, had an opportunity to have a brief discussion around this strategy, and there were a number of questions that we raised and a number of points that we raised as councillors which we felt hadn't quite been addressed in the draft that was presented for decision tonight. And we've asked the officers whether there's any problem for us to delay this by probably 2 weeks in order to be able to have a further discussion and another few points considered. We were assured that there's no major problem for us in our planning, that one of the considerations is obviously that people are going to come tonight and speak to it. Thank you for coming tonight. There is an opportunity, if this is successful, to continue that conversation with us in the next couple of weeks, and the points that you've raised to address them with us, so that we can see whether they can be incorporated in the strategy as well. So we certainly think that this is a really important strategy and would like to sign it off as soon as possible, but in order to make sure that we've crossed all our T's and dotted our I's, we think that we should wait another couple of weeks.
Thank you. Councillor Gross.
Just for Ms Sokol's benefit, because she came, I just wanted to foreshadow that one of the changes that may not be accepted as change to litter, and I would like to foreshadow that this afternoon I thought that we should recognise somehow the enormous growth of voluntary litter warriors. So I'm thinking of Beach Patrol, the Ploggers, Love Our Streets, and I think they should be acknowledged and mentioned in the strategy, because they're significant allies and warriors who can help us on the journey.
Councillor Baxter.
I thought I'd just provide some extra reassurance to people saying, "Why? Hang on, why are you putting this off?" Just to say that I think everybody's aware that waste is something that there's so much up in the air right now, and there's so much going on all across the state, and change in that sort of respect. So I think it's just a good idea that we make sure we get this right before we adopt it, and I think that make sure that we're all comfortable as well, because we've all got to back it, and we've all got to make sure this is successful. So I think it's a good idea to put it off a couple of weeks until we're 100% sure, maybe not 100% sure, but pretty sure that we're happy with it.
Thank you, Councillor Baxter. Would anyone else like to speak? But I'll also reiterate one of the points you mentioned, Ms Sokol, about what actions there are and when. So we'll be making that a bit more pointy, is one of the requests that we've asked the officers to address. So thank you for your feedback, because we also identified the same thing. Councillor Simic, would you like to close? If not, then I will put that motion. All those in favour? All those against? That motion's carried. I'll move on to the planning. Item number 12, delegation to the CEO, placemaking activities, and we have one person that's requested to speak. Miss Jennifer Edge, please. Welcome, Miss Edge. If you could state your name and your suburb and after turning the microphone on.
Sorry, Jen and St Kilda. Look, I'm speaking on the fly, having just picked up the papers outside, and I just asked what placemaking was. I was here on the 21st of February, and I asked some questions then which have still not been dealt with, so perhaps I can try and bring them together. One of the things I was told was placemaking includes signage, and one of the things that I've been trying to do for 13 years is get clear, visible signage on the public toilets, particularly around the pier and the foreshore. The response that I received back from Joanne McNeil, following up on my attendance here on the 21st of February, was that the signage is something that's considered by council building maintenance team, and as the opening of public toilets varies according to seasons, they're not prepared to put up clear signage saying when those toilets are open and accessible.
Miss Edge, can I clarify, are you asking the time for the toilets that's open or just that there are toilets there?
Well, finding a sign pointing to the toilets is difficult, but if you, like me, know where they are, it'd be nice to know when they're open. The other thing is I live near Jim Duggan Reserve, and I thank Council for some upgrades that have occurred there. I've been lobbying for some 6 years for outdoor sporting equipment to be put in that area because of the high density, low income. The difficulty I have as I get older and my vision gets worse is trying to understand why, having worked through the heritage part of council and lobbied for many years for signage in parks because I didn't know who Jim Duggan was, why when you've got a plinth over a metre tall is the font this big and only taking up a third of the plinth? If you've got the space, can you make it bigger so that we can see it? To that end, just as an aside about placemaking, it'd be really nice to see the police patrols of Marriott Street and the Jim Duggan Reserve reinstated and more attention paid to that area by council workers. I'm constantly having to follow up with hard rubbish removal, dropped limbs, which are constant with the gums in that park, and lighting, and particularly as the park is now known as a place for itinerant homeless, it creates other safety issues. So we're only looking at 12.1. I'll be back.
Okay, thank you, Miss Edge.
Thanks for the time.
Thank you. A councillor may take up those questions on your behalf. Councillors, it's now your turn. Do you have any questions for the officers on this item, which is delegation to the CEO placemaking activities? Councillor Pearl.
I'll take that first question up, which is, can we define what placemaking is in the context of this motion?
Ms. Bennett.
Through you, Madam Mayor. Placemaking is an approach really working with the community because, as we've seen tonight, with Miss Edge, the community know their place best. So it's working with the community, all parts of that, be it residents, traders, developers, landlords, to really create together a common vision for the place. Council's role within that is a facilitator, and obviously delivering on those parts that are within Council's direct control. It's a deep engagement process and has been practiced by a number of cities across the world quite successfully for a number of years.
Thank you, Ms Bennett. Any other questions, councillors? There are not. So we have an officer's recommendation. Do I have a mover for that or something different? Councillor Copsey to move. Councillor Gross to second. Councillor Copsey, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you. So this is an interesting place for councillors to find themselves, because part of this is to use expertise that we have within the organisation on placemaking, which to me seems, a relatively, it's a well-tested discipline, that's the word I'm looking for, to work with communities to give them more authority and ownership about place. It will involve the organisation being a bit more nimble and quick to work with a number of community reference groups to produce some quick win changes to some precincts that we would like to try out placemaking and see if we can partner with community to produce places that people want to spend time, that have a distinct character and are really loved and owned by the community. It involves delegation to allow some of that quick responsive trial behaviour, and so that's what this motion does tonight. I think it's important to note, for the purposes of the public record and those who are interested in this activity, that some of those trials are around actions that can be reversed quickly if they're not working. So this is a very iterative process, and it involves deep consultation with the community. It's something a bit different than, and builds on past efforts by the City of Port Phillip, which knows that we have an active community that loves the places that they live and wants to take that strength and connection and try and produce some really good outcomes for the community. So I am really excited to see what is produced through this process, and encourage people who have a strong sense of connection to place to get involved with those reference groups and really take advantage of this. It's going to be a really great outcome. I have a strong feeling.
Thank you, Councillor Copsey. Clarifying question?
Sorry, I just read the red text. Apologies for this, because I only just read it here. The red text in 3.1 says of Fitzroy Street Waterfront Place. Clarendon Street's not there? Oh, is it? Sorry, pardon me.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I'll ask Ms Pence to clarify for all councillors.
Thank you. Yes, I didn't mention it was an alternative motion.
Through you, Madam Mayor, officers held the first piece of engagement with the South Melbourne placemaking group on Tuesday of this week. As part of that engagement, it became apparent that the precinct or designated precinct, as included in attachment 2 for South Melbourne, probably wasn't quite right from the community's perspective, so the community that know that area well and best. Hence the recommendation around spending more time working with councillors and the relevant community to define that designated precinct so that it makes sense for place users.
So just to follow up, the amount of money that's allocated off the top of my head on the total program is 1.52. The budget reallocation was 900,300 per precinct. So if that 300 was to be spent on South Melbourne, would that come back to council?
Ask another question. Another way, has the budget changed in terms of its allocation per precinct?
Through you, Madam Mayor. So at the moment, through the Art and Soul strategy, there's been a global allocation to placemaking. We haven't yet sat down and worked out how that'll be allocated across each of the precincts. So it's an allocation over the entire length of the Art and Soul strategy. A portion of that funding is for staffing costs, and a portion of that is to be spent within those designated precincts in a way that makes sense and is agreed by those place users.
But we allocated that in the budget process per place. There was $300,000 per place per year of the 3 years. Or sorry, there was an amount. I thought the original amount was $300,900 in total. So we've already allocated an amount per place in the budget.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I'd need to take that on notice just to clarify that. I don't recall off the top of my head.
There seems to be some discrepancy about that. I also recall it was 3 precincts for an amount of money. Councillor Pearl, is this material?
It's for me, not for you, so let's continue. As in, I'm being sarcastic, I'm joking. Let's continue.
Right. Councillor Gross, would you like to speak to the motion?
Okay. Madam Mayor, I know I've got a bit of a reputation for being boosterist, boost up all the wonderful ideas that come to council, and I know people think I'm a bit of a stooge of the CEO, but this is what happened. When the CEO arrived here, it was obvious to us and became quickly obvious to him that there were issues with several parts of our municipality, and places that had formerly been incredibly vibrant and dynamic were less so. I don't want to accentuate the negative, but there are real possibilities to grab back some urban vibrancy and sense of safety in some places, and this is our CEO's expertise. And he's come here and taken this, really taken this idea of placemaking, and we're giving it a real go. I think that it's important that we face the facts, that there are criticisms of the way some of our places are travelling. One only has to go to Fitzroy Street on a Saturday night, particularly in the beach end, and it is languishing. I don't want to go on too much about that, because I think, as you put it, that we're on the J curve. So I am confident that things can improve for the commercial operators there. I went to the South Melbourne one, and that was great because the people there love South Melbourne, but were quite open about the ways it could improve. And Waterfront Place, compare Waterfront Place as an entry point for the ferries and the liners that are coming to the piers. You know, it's just, could be better. It's great, but it could be better. So part of the way we make things better is to have to be agile. I know that word's been damned by certain federal politicians. It's to be agile and fleet of foot to make the quick decisions. And when processes go through the council, they're slow, and I really trust and welcome the CEO with the protections in 3.11. I trust that speed will be good for these areas, and I'm looking forward to them really bouncing back. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor Gross. Councillor Pearl.
I'm torn on this one. And I've been torn the whole time. So when this was discussed in the budget process, the councillors asked for more information, which was provided by the CEO, and that was convinced the majority of councillors to put it in the budget. Now it's been formed up further, which is a good thing. I agree with Councillor Gross. We need to have a better gateway to Melbourne from the cruise point of view. I was in Hobart on the weekend where they're getting 80 or 90 ships a year, one of the deepest seaports in the world. They have the natural harbour to take those ships in, and they're now greeted by a beautiful city with a beautiful interface, which we don't. We certainly don't have a beautiful interface. And compared to international cities, even depending on which dock you get off at, in Sydney is spectacular. Singapore, Hong Kong, those places are a beauty to behold. Not that we should be building a whole city around a cruise terminal. In terms of the placemaking initiative here, I'm not going to support it, but you can't sit on the fence here. You can't abstain. I'm interested to see how this works out. I'm just not convinced the $1.5 million that's going to be spent is going to have bang for buck. And if we were going to start it, and I said this in the budget process, I'd like to see it started somewhere like Clarendon Street, where the bones of the ecosystem are already there. So when this money gets put in, it has an immediate benefit that can be measured. We put a lot of money into St Kilda Festival. We've put millions of dollars into Fitzroy Street already. I think we need to trial this somewhere else and see how it works. And the placemaking arrangements for waterfront place, etc., really I don't think are going to provide lasting benefit to the sort of achievements that we all want to see here. So I'm not supporting it because I can't abstain, but I'll be interested to see how, if it works, and if it does work in the first instance, I'll be happy to support it going forward. But I'm not convinced, based on what I've seen, that it's gonna work. But I hope the CEO proves me wrong, and I wish him best if he gets this up tonight.
Thank you, Councillor Pearl. Would anyone else like to speak? Councillor Brand.
Yes, I just want to throw my support behind it, this move as well. I love the whole city. I love particularly St Kilda and Fitzroy Street. I love South Melbourne. I'm very interested in the waterfront, Waterfront Place. They're all places that actually do need. We are really starting with Clarendon Street as well. I mean, we're doing 3 starts. Pretty much in the same program together, and they'll all be different, and they'll all test this program out in different ways. And they all need this sort of approach. It's an integrated approach that looks at sort of what I'd call like the cultural economy of a place. It's not just a landscaping approach. It's not just a promotion approach. It's not just a keep the streets safe approach. It's an approach that actually puts all of the ingredients together into one, and actually works through it slowly and systematically with all the players. In Fitzroy Street, early this week, we had a meeting with the property owners and their agents in Fitzroy Street, which is a group that is actually often left out of the equation. It's very easy to get the traders together because they have a traders association and they ask council to do all sorts of things, and they're very, very active, and we can always engage the community because there's always members of the community who want to be involved and be engaged. But the actual landowners the property owners are quite reclusive in many ways, and it's really important to get them in on it. And I don't think we can find a solution until we look at the depth of property. Tenants, the choice of tenants and the rents in these sorts of places, and that's the only way to do it. So that's what we're doing. We're throwing. It's a sign. The way that we're doing this placemaking process is a sign that this council is very, very serious about getting this right. We've thrown a lot of money. We have thrown a lot of money at Fitzroy Street in the past. We've done some brilliant landscaping, which was demanded by the traders in particular, and it hasn't solved the problem at all. It'll be a major important part of Fitzroy Street when it becomes a great street again. The landscaping will stand up. It's really good landscaping, but it hasn't solved the problem. We've got to go deeper than that, and I think this is a sign that that is exactly what we're doing. We're throwing our resources at it seriously in terms of officer time, in terms of money in terms of our intellectual abilities and in terms of putting our best and most expert personnel onto it, which is our CEO. So that's what we're doing. It's optimistic, it's adventurous, it's very, very positive, and I urge everybody in the community, from traders to property owners, to all get behind this and make it work.
Thank you, Councillor Brand. Would anyone else like to speak? Councillor Bond?
Yes, I will be supporting this, hoping that the actions or this delegated authority to the CEO will give him the ability to make some very quick decisions without traders, businesses, members of the public having to go through the usual bureaucratic process that members of the public and traders have to go through when they come up with an idea. The idea behind this is that they can just talk, go straight to the CEO or the person that's looking after this particular area for us, and he has the authority to make that decision on the spot, so we can implement very quickly ideas that the traders come up with and get things working along there. I think over the last 6 years I've had lots and lots of traders and members of the public come up with various ideas for Fitzroy Street. They'd like to do this and like to do that. They all seem to get killed by regulation, or we don't have a policy on that, therefore you can't do it. What you want to do is 10 centimetres over that line that we don't allow people to go over. Therefore it's just not possible what you intend to do. It's worth noting that a couple of these areas, in particular Fitzroy Street and Waterfront Place, have been killed by ridiculously high car parking prices. Waterfront Place was doing quite nicely, thank you very much, until we decided to introduce $5 an hour paid parking down there, which has basically emptied the car park and killed the businesses. So I'd urge the CEO, if he's going to look for a very quick win, I can think of one at Waterfront Place that will certainly help bring people back. In terms of Fitzroy Street, there's no doubt that tram down the middle cut access to half the parking on Fitzroy Street, and then the reduction in number of car parks down there made it very difficult for people to get to that street to call in, grab something to eat, stop, shop, etc. So that's not sure how you reverse that bike lane and you reverse that tram down the middle, but certainly good luck to the CEO trying to find a solution there. There's lots of traders down there who have got lots of great ideas, and I do look forward, I will be sending them all your way, and hoping that they're now able to do a lot of the things on the streets out the front of their businesses that they haven't been able to do over the last probably 6 or 8 years. And then Clarendon Street, I think there's probably issues down there as well, where I've had lots of people approach me. They want to do innovative things down lots of those little laneways in South Melbourne, and in most instances have been told no because we don't have a guideline for that, or our policy says you can't do this or can't do that. I look forward to the CEO being able to bring many of those ideas to life by cutting through the red tape that we typically put in front of businesses trying to activate their areas. So all the best and good luck, and we hope this works in these 3 areas.
Thank you, Councillor Bond. Would anyone else like to speak? Councillor Simic?
I wasn't going to say anything, but by listening to the negativity we've just heard, I think it is important for us to point out that this is actually very much about looking at what the opportunities are. We know that there have been some challenges in all of the different areas that we've talked about, but we need fresh thinking and the ability to implement ideas quickly, to make sure that we see different outcomes. If we just for those areas, if we just go with business as usual, it's not going to work. We are so lucky that we've got a CEO who's got professional capabilities in helping us in this area, and a team behind him who is skilled, has done this sort of work before as well, and will mean that we will definitely achieve some outcomes which will be to the benefit to our community. This is about our whole community, not just a subsection of our community. This is about all of us. So I thank the CEO for bringing this to us tonight, and I look forward to seeing the sort of change that we can create in these areas which will positively impact on our community.
Thank you, Councillor Simic. Then, Councillor Copsey, would you like to close? Then I'll put that motion. All those in favour? All those against? That motion's carried. Now we'll move to item 12.2, Footpath, the draft footpath trading fee policy for community consultation. And Ms Jennifer Edge, please. Again, if you could just state your name and suburb, please.
Jen, St Kilda. The reason that I wanted to speak to this is those of you who know me would know that I've been coming here for about 21 years talking about community safety issues and trying to be able to engage in consultation with council over them. Some of the matters that were heard before I arrived tonight, I attempted to have input into since June. So I'm part of a thing that's being revised in council called COPAN, which is City of Port Phillip Access Network. I have a number of challenges that vary from day to day and morning to afternoon to evening, and one of them is vision. I have endeavoured on many occasions through Assist and through Kelly Armstrong and Laura Catapan to get hold of hard copy surveys when councillors said, have your say, without success. Particularly, most recently, in relation to the items discussed tonight around waste management, transport, placemaking. I would hope that having come to speak to again, that something could be done within council to enable people like me who've been here a long time and would really like to have some input to be able to get on a mailing list to receive these things in a timely manner, in hard copy, so that I can have a say. There are at least 160 residents around my bedroom. We're all packed in there, and most of them have just given up on council and council consultation. And that's a sad fact. I mean, there are a number of itinerants. It is a social experiment mix of public housing, private housing, owner-occupiers and investment owners, which makes it difficult. But maybe somebody could send me something on the draft footpath trading fee policy or any other opportunities to consult. I've also put on this a request to receive notices about council meeting in hard copy, because I no longer am in a situation where I have an ISP, I have internet, and so not having those things, I often only find out when I arrive here what's happening. And I do that because I'm not always well enough to be here. So thank you again for your time.
Thank you, Jen. I take accessibility very seriously, and I will take on this on behalf of the councillors to see what we can do around making sure that everyone has access to our council. So we'll get back to you on that.
When assist, I mean, I feel for them when I
Sure.
ask and they can't help.
Thank you. Councillors, that's the last of our questions from the community. Do you have any questions for the officers? I do. My question is about the revenue that's collected from footpath trading. Just wondering where it goes. Is it allocated to anything specific in terms of the footpath trading revenue?
Through you, Madam Mayor, my understanding is now it goes straight into consolidated revenue and funds all of councils, goes towards funding all of council activities.
Thank you, Mr. Carroll. Any other questions? No. Perhaps I have one more question, Mr. J. If I could ask you, why has this come about? Why are we looking at changing our policy or the guidelines around footpath trading?
Through you, Madam Mayor. The Footpath trading fees that are currently in place were adopted in 2003, so are now 15 years old. There has been a few changes in where outdoor dining activity happens, and it's time to revisit the policy and the fees that are charged and the locations to where they are applied.
Are the current fees equitable? I guess that's where I was going in terms of...
So, Madam Mayor, the fees currently charged are tailored to Ackland Street and Fitzroy Street businesses. However, the rest of the municipality is based on a range of averages based on retail rents that are charged. So this is an opportunity to increase equity by tailoring the fees within each precinct.
Okay. So if there are no more questions, councillors, we have an officer's recommendation. Do I have a mover for that? Oh, Councillor Bond for a question. Just got in.
Your option 1 in here describes us as having the Footpath trading charges for 2018 as having a Fitzroy Street charge, an Ackland Street and standard areas charge, and then a discounted areas charge. But we haven't charged a special rate for Ackland Street and Fitzroy Street for a number of years now. So everyone's on the either the standard or the discounted areas, which means we've currently got a 2-tiered system, not the 4-tiered system as you've described in here. So this option 1 you're presenting to us, which says no change, is actually a change from what we've currently been doing over the last at least 4 or 5 years, since about 2014, 2015.
So the question, Councillor Bond?
The question is, well, is your report right?
Mr Jay, has there been a change?
Through you, Madam Mayor, the current fee structure in place is a 4-tier system, so Ackland Street and Fitzroy Street each have their own rates. We then have a standard rate and a discounted rate. Over the past 3 years, Ackland Street and Fitzroy Street have both been reduced to the standard rate and charged at that rate. So it's still a 4-tier system, but year on year reductions have been applied to bring those in line. However, in the current financial year, the Fitzroy Street rate has become lower than the standard rate.
Thank you, Mr Jay. Councillor Bond?
Who made the decision to take Fitzroy Street and Ackland Street off their separate rates, or off the standard rate, and put them back onto the an inflated rate? And the report in front of us shows that Fitzroy Street's going to have the highest of the lot, which is contradictory to what you just said.
Maybe rather than who, why? Councillor Bond, if I can... Mr Jay.
Through you, Madam Mayor, when the 4-tier fee structure was adopted in 2003, Ackland Street and Fitzroy Street were defined as the premium strips, which therefore had their own rate applied. So currently, for the last 3 years, Ackland Street and Fitzroy Street have had reductions put in place, reducing them down to the standard rate.
I'll rephrase my question. Who made the decision not to apply those reductions for Fitzroy Street and Ackland Street down to the standard rate for this year?
Mr Jay.
Yeah. Okay. Through you, Madam Mayor, I'm referring to Table 2 of my report. The Fitzroy Street rate for a setting, which is 1 table and 4 chairs, would be $548.30, which is cheaper than the standard and Ackland Street rates, which is $588.95.
Councillor Bond.
I'm looking at the same table, and it shows the cost for a table on Fitzroy Street of $92, the cost for a table on Ackland Street of $85. So what? This makes no sense. Why do we charge more for a table on Fitzroy Street than we do on Ackland Street or the standard, but less for a chair on Fitzroy Street than we do on Ackland Street?
Thank you, Mr Jay.
Through you, Madam Mayor, the rates that have been applied year on year have been amended in accordance with the latest retail rent data every 2 years since 2003. Over that period of time, there was roundings put in place, and when the increases were added each 2 years, that has caused an anomaly to the rate charged to a Fitzroy Street table. However, it's opportune through this review to put that back in place and get the split equal between the tables and the chairs.
Thank you, that's clear. Now is the opportunity to get it correct, Councillor Bond.
So where is the correction in here?
Through you, Madam Mayor, the officer's recommendation in attachment 4 corrects the split between the tables and the chairs and the rates to be charged.
Mr Jay, I also have a question. In the recommendation, just clarifying if I could, 3.3a, it says discounting fees by 50% for the first year for new businesses at properties where outdoor dining has not previously occurred. Is that a general vicinity, or is it like if there was a business next door and retail shops open for the first time? Can you just clarify exactly what that means? Is it the actual spot or the vicinity?
Through you, Madam Mayor, recognising the vibrancy that outdoor dining can bring, this was an opportunity to encourage businesses that have not had outdoor dining before and would like to trial it, to do so at a reduced fee.
Thank you. And a follow-up question on B. It says they're providing discounts to outdoor dining permit holders affected by major building works. So major, do we have a definition around that? I've had a few issues recently and I just was wondering whether that would cover it.
Through you, Madam Mayor, there have been a number of opportunities to apply such a discount recently through the Ackland Street upgrade, the Moray Street bike lane and the Carlisle Street tram upgrade. So those are what we would consider to be major works. However, we would look at each one on a case-by-case basis as to whether it would be appropriate to apply discounts and the impact on their outdoor dining ability to trade.
Councillor Crawford.
Can I just clarify, Mr Jay? Option 3, which was suggested perhaps, has dropped the rate by which from 25%, which has been applied in the formula in the previous, since 2003, to 20%. So we are looking at already, Council, at making it a more equitable and cheaper option where possible to encourage trading. So that's a very deliberate decision or discussion that Council's had previously, that could be a possibility.
And yes, through you, Madam Mayor, the reduction of 5% to the rates charged for tables and chairs in regular outdoor dining settings as well as glass screen environments, dropping by 5% would certainly be a way of encouraging that activity, particularly in out-of-centre locations.
Okay, councillors, we have an officer's recommendation. Do I have a mover for that or something different? Councillor Copsey to move, Councillor Brand to second. Councillor Copsey, would you like to speak to the motion?
thank you to the officers for your work on bringing a little bit more clarity and equity to the way that our footpath trading system operates. I have no doubt that we were very diligent when we established these rates in 2003, but obviously a lot has changed since then. And there's been a certain amount of drift over the term of the policy that's led to some fairly strange outcomes in the last few years, and a lot of work for officers to have to respond to those in individual cases. I think the officers have thought more about footpath trading than most people ever would in their lifetime. It's actually a very important thing to encourage vibrancy and foot traffic and a pleasant alfresco environment, but we also have to manage the fact that the footpath is a public right-of-way and we need to maintain accessibility. So these are important principles for us to keep in mind as we approach this. I note that Council is only sending this policy out for community consultation this evening, should it be successful on the vote, and that there are 5 weeks for people to respond. And I think from the work that's gone into this, there has been a very thorough examination of what's a more equitable outcome, where the zones that footpath trading applies are much more aligned with the current usage of our streets and the existing outdoor dining experience that's on offer in Port Phillip, which has grown. And that's really great to see. I will welcome feedback on this policy, and I think it's going to lead to a much more equitable outcome amongst all of our traders, and hopefully a better dining experience for people in the city of Port Phillip.
Thank you, Councillor Copsey. Councillor Brand.
Yes, Councillor Copsey said pretty much everything I would say. I think whenever we charge a fee for anything, I think it's important that people feel confident that it's fair and reasonable and equitable, the way we're changing it, and I think this is definitely a step in that direction. It's a much more nuanced way of doing it. It applies a principle equally to all traders, taking into consideration, acknowledging that the place that they trade is different in each case, in each area and within each area. So it makes it a lot, it's based on a universal principle, but it makes it a lot more fairly applied. And I think it's a great improvement. I think this is what we should be aiming at all areas, levels of policy, the way that we treat neighbourhoods equitably and fairly. So I look forward to the public consultation. I very much want to hear from the traders that they feel that this is actually a fairer approach and a better approach. And if they don't, I want to hear that too, because we will eventually get this as right as it can possibly be. I'm happy with the way it's going.
Thank you, Councillor Brand. Would anyone else like to speak? And Councillor Bond.
I won't be supporting this because I think a 22-tiered fee policy for footpath trading in the city of Port Phillip is just ridiculous. It's not often I praise the City of Yarra, but the City of Yarra have a policy of charging the same amount per table and same amount per chair regardless of where that table or chair is located anywhere in the city of Yarra. And I think that's certainly something we should be implementing here, just a nice simple policy that everyone could understand. And we set it at a rate where the purpose is not to raise income, but the purpose is to activate our streets. There's nothing nicer than walking down Acland Street when it's full of people eating, or Bridport Street or Bay Street or Clarendon Street, Cecil near the market. It's wonderful when you walk along these parts of our city and there's tables and chairs full of people all eating outdoors, and I think that should be the purpose of our footpath trading fee policy, is to encourage that, not to raise money. And certainly 22 tiers is just incredible. I never thought a policy could get so complicated, but yet we've managed to achieve that. Something nice and simple that everyone can understand. It'd certainly get my support, not this.
Thank you, Councillor Bond. Would anyone else like to speak? Councillor Copsey, would you like to close?
The policy needs to be equitable, and if that means that it needs to be nuanced for the particular circumstances of various trading areas, then that's what we should implement. And I thank the officers for their hard work to make sure that they're putting forward an option that they think will achieve that. And I'm looking forward to the community feedback. And I note that it's quite extensive with a lot of face-to-face consultation with people affected. And I wish you all the best in undertaking that.
Thank you. Then I'll put that motion. All those in favour? All those against? That motion's carried. Councillor Bond has requested a division on the draft footpath trading fee policy for community consultation, so I'll ask you to vote again. All those in favour? Councillor Copsey, Councillor Brand, Councillor Simic, Councillor Voss, Councillor Pearl, Councillor Gross, Councillor Crawford, Councillor Baxter. All those against? Councillor Bond. That motion's carried. Now we'll go to 14.1, which is the Assembly of Councillors. There nobody that's requested to speak. Councillors, do you have any questions of the officers? If not, Councillor Baxter has requested to move. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Copsey to second. Would you like to speak to the motion? No? Would anyone like to speak to the motion? Then I'll put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Now we'll go to notices of motion, and we have one notice of motion tonight. Item 15.1 is from Councillor Copsey regarding a proposal to award a cultural grant recognising the life of Mirkamora. And councillors, we have received a request from two people from the public to speak to this item. And I'd now like to call on Ms. Jennifer Stone to come forward, please. Welcome. If you could please state your name and suburb.
Hello, councillors. My name is Jennifer Stone. I'm speaking tonight as President of the St Kilda Historical Society. I'd like to thank Councillor Copsey for bringing this motion to the Chamber for consideration of all councillors. Since Mirka's death on the 27th of August, there's been such an outpouring of love and admiration for this celebrated artist. It's difficult to think of another artist who could inspire such a wide and affectionate community response. A great deal has been documented about Mirka and George's story of immigration and their impact on Melbourne's restaurant and artistic cultures, but Mirka's St Kilda story has not been fully documented. Mirka loved St Kilda. She said it was where she felt most at home, and her impact in the local community was very significant. The St Kilda Historical Society are really keen to capture as soon as possible the rich local stories that capture Mirka's mischievous humour, radiant personality and the impact of her art in and on the local community. Thank you, councillors.
Thank you, Ms. Stone. Ms. Jennifer Edge, please. Welcome again. You're getting a bit of exercise.
Oh, it's a good thing. No stick tonight. I also want to concur with what the President of the St Kilda Historical Society has just said. I have to point out I'm a life member of the St Kilda Historical Society, and so I'm really pleased that this motion has come up. Mirka used to live in Barclay Street for a long time. I lived off Barclay Street for a long time, and yes, I can only agree with what's been said before, and fingers crossed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms Edge. Councillors, now, before I ask Councillor Copsey to move this notice of motion, I'd like to give you the opportunity as well to ask questions of the officers in relation to this notice of motion. So, does anyone have a question? Councillor Pearl.
And I don't know the answer to this question, so there's no Dorothy Dix in this, but was this put to a committee, considered, rejected, now we're coming back? Have we already considered this as a committee? This proposal or a proposal similar to this proposal?
Thank you, Councillor Pearl. Ms Strano, are you able to speak to that?
Through you, Madam Mayor, yes, this project was put to the Cultural Development Fund earlier this year. It was one of a number of interesting and worthy projects that weren't competitive in that particular round. I would make 2 points about that. One is that as an application, it didn't have the supporting documentation that was required and that other applications did have, even though the St Kilda Historical Society is known for their strong project delivery. So while they weren't able to be successful in that round, the committee also recognises that perhaps there are some aspects of the Cultural Development Fund guidelines that could perhaps be tweaked in future to make it a little bit more accessible for the more traditional cultural heritage projects. I think given the circumstances... So
just to be clear, it was considered by the committee?
It was considered by the committee.
It wasn't funded by the committee?
It wasn't funded by the committee.
Okay, that's it. That answers the question.
Thank you. Councillor Crawford.
Can I ask, then, when it was considered, was the level of applications high, and it was considered to be a worthy application, I think you mentioned. It just was in terms of you couldn't fund everything, and it might have been on the lower of the list. And obviously her death has brought, it changes the circumstances in which it might have been considered.
That's totally true, through you, Madam Mayor. As a application to that particular fund, it wasn't as competitive as some of the other very highly competitive ones, and we've discussed this in previous meetings before. However, the other aspect of that was the application wasn't as detailed as we would have required. I think that the intervening time would have assisted the Historical Society to complete some of that detail and to get the rest of the ducks in line to be able to deliver a project, and this would, I think, go some way to helping them deliver that.
Ms Strano, you were in the process of talking about altering potentially the criteria around who can apply and making that more equitable. We have professional grant writers and they're very good and successful, but our historical societies relies primarily on volunteers. Are you able to sort of elaborate what that might look like?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. We do recognise that there is a very large diverse group of people who do apply to the Cultural Development Fund. Some of those are professional arts organisations and cultural groups. Some are community-based organisations and individuals. There's a difference sometimes in the capacity of being able to put together those grants. Also with community-driven groups, there are often changes in committees. So that's one aspect of it. The other aspect is that while we've had quite a surge and an increase in applications to the Cultural Development Fund from very innovative, creative, artistic projects, we do want to re-examine that to make sure that some of the other projects that might rely more on cultural heritage don't get swamped. So our Cultural Development Fund Committee are meeting again in November, and we'll be asking them to have another look at those guidelines to see how we can make it more accessible.
Thank you. And one further question from me is the $10,000, the request. Where will this come from? Can you elaborate on that, please?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We would be looking at our the Cultural Development Fund has been expended for this financial year. We would be looking at a rearrangement of our budget in terms of our ability to fund other things.
Thank you, Ms Strano. Councillor Bond.
Just looking at the list of projects that were funded in our cultural development grants, and I've just noticed there's one here called Price Check the Musical by Sean Weatherly, who's a member of the Port Phillip Greens. Councillor Copsey chaired that particular proposal. Did she declare a conflict of interest and step out of the room while that application was assessed?
Councillor Bond, there has been a point of order raised, and I'm just going to seek advice. Thank you. I'm going to overrule what you've just said, Councillor Bond. The reason is we're not discussing the previous cultural grants. That has already been and gone. Thank you. You may raise with that separately. Any other questions on this particular item, councillors? If not, we have... So, Councillor Copsey, would you like to move this motion?
I would indeed. Thank you very much to the members of the St Kilda Historical Society who have come tonight to speak to the motion. It's a very sad occasion that's prompted me to bring this evening. I think that many people in the community have been touched by Mirka, both here in St Kilda, but she's had a huge influence across the state and the country. She was larger than life, and she's certainly somebody who I think speaks to the soul of St Kilda, and her contribution really must be honoured. I am very pleased that officers have been able to assist in preparing the recommendation tonight to award the cultural grant for the specific project for the St Kilda Historical Society. The other thing that we'll be requesting officers to do between now and we're looking at around November 2020 is ways that we can recognise Mirka's contribution. We have a number of ways that we already mark her contribution. Her murals obviously are part of the fabric of our city, and we also have Mirka Lane, which is named in her memory. And of course, she's
actually Councillor Copsey. We need a seconder.
So sorry. Oh my gosh.
Just lost concentration there for a second.
That's fine.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Crawford, sorry. Keep going, Councillor Copsey.
I won't restate all that. I don't need to say much more. What I actually am hoping that we will see through the project is that many people who may have known Mirka much more intimately than I do will have the chance to document those experiences and really provide a living memory to a living memorial to her that we can access and share through our city to celebrate her contribution. And I'm hoping that we'll also find ways that our city can creatively respond to the great creative force that Mirka was. So, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Copsey, would you like to speak?
Crawford.
It's hard when we both have C surnames. I'm going to be short and sweet. I think it's an appropriate thing to celebrate and recognise and put into in memoriam how Mirka related to St Kilda. Our city is based on creatives. What the reputation of St Kilda is about: creative, full of life, people that came, characters in their own right, that came, they congregated, they created here. And she is just another one of those wonderful people that make up the heart and soul that continues on but started to shape St Kilda. So I think it is a worthwhile project to capture that for forever, for people who won't have known Mirka, who will be in this council and live in this community in years to come, to understand what her contribution was at this time.
Thank you, Councillor Crawford. Councillor Simic.
Thank you, Councillor Copsey, for bringing this motion tonight, and for the Historical Society for raising it to our attention as well. I agree with everything that's been said so far tonight. I also wanted to use this opportunity to point out that a state memorial is going to be held for Mirka Moore on the 25th of September. at the Palais Theatre starting at 2 o'clock, and invite everyone to attend as well. She certainly had an incredible impact on our community. I didn't know her personally, but I'm very aware of the impact that she's had on our community. It is very fitting that we support this proposal tonight, given her sad passing in particular, and very fitting that a state memorial is held to honour her life and celebrate her achievements.
Would anyone else like to speak? Councillor Pearl.
Echo the comments Councillor Simic made about the state memorial next week rather. We passed a condolence motion at the last meeting or the meeting before, which was symbolic of the council's respect that was paid on the sad passing. I had the fortune to meet her a number of times, and the first time was 20 years ago, and I talked about that last time. So she made a huge contribution that should be respected. I don't support this on the basis that there's less detail provided here in this motion that was provided to a council committee, which is set up for the sole purpose of assessing these grants based on merit, and that committee, for whatever reason, decided not to fund it. And that is the committee that is best placed to make these decisions because they have more expertise. That's why we set them up. That's why not every single grant application comes to a council chamber for us to make the decision. We set these committees up, which are chaired by councillors in some instances, for them to consider the facts according to a criteria with detail. There's no real detail attached to this. And albeit I'm a member of the St Kilda Historic Society, I took advice from our governance department, and I don't have a conflict in this matter. And I'm sure they will do a good job of it. But there's just not enough detail here to provide it. And the precedent that we really rejected at the last council meeting of coming back to council for things that either weren't considered in budget processes or by dedicated committees sets a bad precedent. Plus, I don't see any really huge diminishing of this project or any other project by waiting a little bit longer and putting this forward to the next round of funding when criteria improvements are made and the experts that council selects for this task can ensure that this proposal, which sounds like it has merit, should get up and on an improved process through an improved criteria. So, albeit it's very sad of the passing, etc., and I understand why community members would like to, react and respond in a way which is probably fair and just, but I don't support the process in the way we're doing it. We have processes set up to handle these matters properly, and this is not the way to deal with this item, albeit $10,000. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pearl. Would anyone else like to speak? Councillor Brand.
I certainly support the motion. There are times like this that council needs to make a response with stating an intention to do something about well, in this case, a very important person to St Kilda, and to do something about her death that actually responds to the public sentiment and responds to her place in the history of the city. And if it involves a historical research and a historical sort of monument, it seems entirely appropriate to me that the local historical society would be the vehicle for doing this on occasion. And I think that a local historical society, when it works really well, which it is working really well now, I think, that it becomes a sort of a very closely connected sort of service provider for these sorts of services that the council needs. If the council tried to put together this sort of project by itself, it wouldn't be doing it as well as what the Historical Society would do it. And I think that this is sort of indicative of a very good relationship of a council to a community historical society. So I don't see it as just another application for a grant. It's something that we can rely on our community to provide a very important service in a very special moment for a very special historical figure in our community. So I think it's spot on appropriate. I congratulate Councillor Copsey for bringing it up, and the Historical Society for wanting to do it, and for getting Janine Burke to do it. There is no better art historian in Australia than Janine Burke, so it's really an amazing thing to have her leading this bit of research. We're just incredibly lucky to have this conjunction of stars, and Vale Merker.
Thank you. I'll also speak because I think it is timely and it's important that information is captured now. I think having Dr. Janine Burke, author, art historian, creator and novelist, published over 20 books, including Australian Gothic, A Life of Albert Tucker, The Heart Gardens, Sunday Reed and Heidi, The Gods of Freud, Sigmund Freud's art collection, etc., etc. Doing these surveys and interviews, now is the opportunity when the issue and the topic is so raw and people are wanting to tell the stories and their experiences of Mercat now, not in a year's time, may be the case as well, but now is a really important time to capture this information. So I'm very supportive of this application, and I'd like to congratulate you, Councillor Copsey, for bringing this forward. There's so many stories that I've heard along the way, and one of them, for example, is Merca, when she went on holidays, she never went with any luggage, and you always wondered why. It's because she actually put all of her underwear and all of her clothes on her, and she would take, so she didn't want to carry anything. There was like 50 layers on her. What an incredible, inspiring, funny, creative person, and these stories need to come out because they're particular Merca, particular St Kilda stories, and now is the time to capture them. Now we've got Dr. Janine Burke, now we've got the support from the St Kilda Historical Society, and I know that they have been garnering so much support around this project, and so her son, William Mora, has given his support to the project, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how it ends up. So I fully endorse your motion, Councillor Copsey, if you would like to close.
Yes, there was quite a bit of discussion during the questions around, this having been a project that did put in a separate application to the Cultural Development Fund, and I think the only thing that I'd wish to note in relation to that is that it certainly wasn't by any means sort of rejected. One of the things that came out of this year's round of funding was a request from the community members on the Cultural Development Fund that Council increase the funding so that we can fund more projects. And we were... I was very happy to see that approved as part of this year's budget, with $50,000 annually contributed into that fund, so we can see more of these projects. It's up to individual councillors to decide whether they think that... I don't think that there's anything wrong with the process here. We've got a clearly described project which is going to bring great value to our community, which I think actually has a... I think that that's a really good deal in terms of the price tag that's attached to this motion tonight. So it's clear, and it's up to councillors whether they wish to contribute to this project this evening. I think that we're going to get some fantastic information, I'm sure, and beautiful memories and experiences from the project that I hope will then inform what Council does as step 2 of this motion. So I urge councillors to support this motion tonight as a chance to realise a great living memorial to a legend, Merca Mora.
Thank you, Councillor Copsey. I will now put that motion. All those in favour? All those against? That motion's carried. Councillors, we'll move on to item 16, reports by council delegates. Do we have any reports? No, then we'll move on to urgent councillor reports.
Yeah. I just thought I should put on the record that that at the moment with the MAV there's litigation in the Supreme Court. and one of the board directors is suing the MAV over a decision it made in relation to the qualifications of the president of the MAV. I provided an affidavit for Director Jeff Lyon to support President Mary Lalios. The matter has been fully heard in the Supreme Court, and the judgment was reserved, and in the next few days it's anticipated that judgment will be delivered.
Thank you. Any other councillor reports? Councillor Copsey?
Yes, along with Councillor Brand, I'm the Council's delegate to the Metropolitan Transport Forum, and I just wanted to report that recently the City of Port Phillip held a candidates forum on the issue of transport that was organised through the MTF and Leader newspapers, and we were very pleased to provide the opportunity for community members to come and quiz the three candidates for Albert Park from the Greens, Liberals and Labor. Oggie Simic, Andrew Bond and sitting member Martin Foley. It was a really well attended evening with more questions than we could fit into the time in the end. So we've obviously got a community who's very engaged on this issue and was interested in the offering, and certainly I think there were a lot of questions that evening that aligned with the integrated transport strategy priorities that we have endorsed tonight as a council.
Thank you, Councillor Copsey. Okay, so we'll move to urgent business. Council, there's two items of urgent business, which are two separate proposed motions to be presented to the upcoming MAV State Council meeting. Firstly, I need a mover and a seconder for Council to consider two items of urgent business in relation to two motions to be presented to the 19th of October 2018 MAV State Council meeting. Councillor Simic to move, Councillor Baxter to second. Thank you. I'll now put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried. I intend to do each one separately. Okay, so we'll go to homelessness and of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Can I have a councillor to move a motion? Councillor Gross? Would you like me to read that for you, or would you like to read that? Sorry?
I'm happy to read it. I need a seconder though, don't I? Yeah, normally you read it and then we'll have a seconder. Madam Mayor, the motion reads in this way. The Council submits the following motion to the 19 October 2018 Municipal Association of Victorian State Council meeting, that the Municipal Association of Victoria recognise the risk of homelessness of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, calls on the State Government to provide targeted support, including supportive accommodation, to address those needs.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Copsey? Would you like to speak to the motion now, Councillor Gross?
I would, Madam Mayor. Look, this arises out of the count that was conducted across inner urban municipalities, and some data was collected which showed the overrepresentation of this group of people. And I think that the MAV has a number of policies on homelessness, but I think it's important to augment and inform that policy. This was recommended by our officers, and I'm happy to take that recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Gross. Councillor Copsey, would you like to speak to the motion?
No, that's fine. I think it's an important motion. I'm happy to second it.
Would anyone else like to speak to the motion? If not, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Now, we'll move to the other urgent item of business, 17.2, Metro Rail Infrastructure. Can I have a councillor to move a motion, please?
I'd like to move it, if that's okay, Madam Mayor.
Absolutely. What would you like to move?
The Council submits the following motion to the 19 October 2018 Municipal Association Victoria State Council meeting, that the MAV calls on the State Government to deliver the greatest social and economic benefits from their investment in metro rail infrastructure by ensuring that proposed suburban rail loop business case investigates the best staging and development options for both the Melbourne Metro 2 and the suburban rail loop. And we were talking before about an amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Gross. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Simic to second. Councillor Gross, would you like to speak to the motion?
No, well, I'm
would you
happy
like to reserve your right? Yes.
Yes.
All right. Councillor Simic, would you like to speak to the motion? Or would you like to reserve your right? Councillor Copsey, would you like to speak?
I would like to move an amendment to this motion.
If you could please state that amendment.
So it's just the addition of some further words on the end of the second bullet point. Apologies, I'm just going to think how this would be done best. Okay, so at the end of that sentence, to insert the words, in the event that the suburban rail loop business case delete those. What I'm looking for is that there will be a timely investigation and business case for Metro 2. So
may I suggest?
I think it should just say, and the suburban rail loop, comma, or that a business case, or that the Metro Rail 2 project proceed immediately at the conclusion of Metro Rail 1, whichever is the earlier. Does that make sense?
So, Councillor Copsey, what you're trying to achieve is that this motion does not delay the implementation of Metro Rail 2.
Correct. And Council has a committed advocacy position to see Metro Rail 2 proceed immediately following,
right.
or
so,
immediately.
All right. So just still working on the words at the moment, and you could probably go and
Apologies.
speak to rather than.
Madam Mayor, can I propose a 3-minute break while we work on the wording, and then we can come back to it?
I think that caveat covers what I'm seeking to achieve.
Okay, are you happy with that?
I think it's the victim of several drafters, but I think it covers what I'm seeking to achieve. And if it's successful, I hope that Councillor Gross will be able to explain what we meant at the conference.
The amendment's acceptable to me.
Thank you. So I do need a seconder for Councillor Copsey's motion. Councillor Brand to second. Councillor Copsey, would you like to speak to the motion?
I think I've said enough. I think I've run out of words.
Councillor Brand, would you like to speak to the amended motion?
Yes, I think just to try and translate, it just it means that no matter how good the suburban rail loop sounds, that the consideration of Metro 2 isn't dependent on what happens to that it will be considered in its own right as well.
So why don't we remove all references to suburban railway?
Because we like the idea, and it's I think it's all worth supporting, but I don't think that we're just making sure we're not putting the rail loop as the priority over Metro 2, which is of very immediate and importance to the City of Port Phillip.
Thank you, Councillor Brand. Councillor Gross, you would like to speak to the motion? The amended motion?
The amended motion, close that is, or other people might want to speak.
No, you've got the full motion.
The full motion.
You can speak to the amended motion.
Okay, so I think the amendment's quite clever because it's disaggregating it from the suburban rail loop. So if the suburban rail loop's either incredibly successful in a business case or incredibly unsuccessful and abandoned, our ideas about the Melbourne Metro 2 still require a business case. So that's how I interpret your rules, your words, as distinguishing it from the suburban rail loop if it's incredibly successful or incredibly unsuccessful. The delivery of the Melbourne Metro Rail 2 will really increase the livability and efficiency of the growing communities in the inner urban area. It's supported by a number of other inner urban councils, and those councils have been enumerated in the supporting information. And yeah, we just don't want it forgotten and ignored just because another idea has surfaced in the course of an election.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak to the amended motion? If not, the amendment. The amendment. We're putting the amendment. I'll put the amendment. All those in favour? That's carried. So we're now talking about the substantive, that's now become the substantive motion. Would anyone like to speak to the substantive motion? Councillor Bond?
I won't be supporting this just because I don't think Metro Rail 2 should be tied into the suburban rail link. The suburban rail link will never happen. It's just a election promise that'll be forgotten about straight after the election, and the business case for it is very unlikely to happen either. If we want to advocate for Metro Rail 2, let's just put up a motion that says let's commence the business case now so that construction can start immediately Melbourne Metro 1 is finished. It shouldn't be dependent upon anything that has to do with the suburban rail loop. So.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak to this new substantive motion? Councillor Copsey.
Yes, that's exact. Yes, just to respond to Councillor Bond's comments, that's exactly what the amendment that Council just passed seeks to do. If the suburban rail loop business case proceeds, it should incorporate the Melbourne Metro Rail 2. However, Melbourne Metro Rail 2's business case should not be delayed by the suburban rail loop if it's to proceed on its own. They're both very... Metro 2 is an immediate need for our city, and our council has a very clear position on advocating to make sure that the rail infrastructure that we need to make sure that Fisherman's Bend is functional and achieves the sustainable and active transport neighbourhoods that we want to see in alignment with the vision, that they arrive in time for the residents and workers who are going to be in that area. So I think Council's position on Metro Rail 2 is very, very clear. The suburban rail loop is an interesting proposal. It's certainly an idea that would be welcome, and I think that the City of Port Phillip would probably have plenty to say about the suburban rail loop and, you know, whether it should incorporate a connection to the Sandringham line, for example, which is the main train line that services our municipality at present. But I think that it does provide an opportunity, if there's going to be another significant investment in the rail infrastructure that our city so desperately needs, to take that opportunity to push forward with Metro Rail 2 as well. So this just puts another option on the table for advancing that very important project.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak? If not, I'll ask Councillor Gross to close. No? Then I'll put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried. Now, councillors, we've got one item which relates to amendments to contract number 2015/3 for the recyclables processing services contract. I'll now call on a councillor to move that the meeting be closed to members of the public. Thank you, Councillor Pearl. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Gross. And now that the meeting be closed to all members of the public in accordance with Section 89(2)(d) of the Local Government Act 1989, as the item relates to contractual matters. I'll now put that motion. All those in favour? All those against? The motion's carried. Thank you very much. We'll